great things done because of great staff. I'm blessed to have a great team here. And also part of our team is our Mayor Emeritus. Most of you know Mayor Jolly served as mayor of the city of Gaffney for 20 years and still doesn't miss an event that we do. So we really, truly appreciate everything. Unless I happen to plan something on his birthday and he has other plans or something like that, which has been done. But sometimes even on his birthday, I think he's come to the park to a concert, despite that. Are we good to get started with that, Lacey? I don't know which way she went.
She went out for the first round.
Oh, she went to get Albert's food, yeah.
Oh.
Can y'all hear me if I don't use a microphone?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So welcome to the Boys to Men Backwater Rise to Overmountain Victory Lunch and Learn panel discussion. We hope you enjoyed lunch, and we're super, super excited to have all of you here and to do something a little bit different. I am going to, before we get too started, I will tell you that these are, of course, our events that are commemorating the 245th anniversary of the Battle of Kings Mountain. And I don't know if any of you have heard, but the government shutdown. And so Kings Mountain and Cowpens are not open. So Gaffney has rolled out the red carpet, hosting these guys tonight at Jolly Park at 6 o'clock to do their drama the night before Kings Mountain. That's going to be totally different than what we're doing today. So we hope that you'll join us and be a part of that. Then tomorrow at 3 o'clock somewhere, is that still the case?
Yes.
They will be somewhere near the mountain to do their annual Kings Mountain event there. So we'll be at Kings Mountain, but maybe Kings Mountain State Park is a possibility.
And we're looking at the possibility of at least somewhere up there, State Park, I don't think, Mark's,
No,
still hadn't got back with
Never
you.
got back to me.
But
Okay.
we're thinking about maybe, I know there's a parking lot there where they do park vehicles for different activities, and we slip in there or just pull off the side of the road up there and do something.
Okay, all right. If you need it, Blacksburg has a nice little amphitheater now too, so we can reach out to our neighbor and partner. So today we're going to be diving into remarkable untold stories of Overmountain men, those rugged frontiersmen from the backcountry settlements across the Appalachian Mountains. Sarcastically called backwater boys by their British adversary, Major Patrick Ferguson. These boys crossed the mountain not once, but twice in 1780. Their journeys embodied resilience, strategy, and the spirit of independence that helped forge our nation. We'll explore the unsung aspects of this saga, the influences shaping their tactics, the home front heroes who kept the fires burning, the grueling trails they traversed, the shadowy world of spies and messengers, the battle itself, and then the complex aftermath. Our expert panel, I use that term lightly, of reenactors and historians from the Overmountain Victory Trail Association. If you don't know about us and our organization, we've got information sitting around here. We'll be happy to talk to you about it. They will bring this history to life. We're going to start with Steve Ricker, who will set the stage with the influences of the Cherokee and the complex relations between the Cherokee and the mountain men. Then Mark Anthony is going to take us through the men who first came over the mountain in the summer of 1780, their motivations, leaders, and the fateful return home, including why Patrick Ferguson dismissed them as backwater boys. Next, Jane Doan will shine the light on the vital roles of women and children on the home front, included documented contributions from remarkable figures who supported the campaign. David Doan follows with the call to muster in 1780, the harsh elements of the trail, and the essential gear the men carried. Tom Vaughn will uncover the messengers and spies from both Patriot and Loyalist sides who operated in the shadows. And then Steve is going to return to guide us through the Battle of Kings Mountain itself. And then finally, we're going to have Tim telling us about, he will conclude with what happened after the battle, from the prisoners' march, events at Biggerstaff, and men's return to their frontier homes. So, as they share their insights, Steve, the floor is yours.
Well, as far as the Cherokee goes, when men like William Bean, James Robinson first went over the Blue Ridge, of course against the rule of King George, they started trading with the Cherokee and building a relationship with them. And over time, the more and more people that went over the mountain to settle, you know, there was a lot of trading, a lot of influential trading went on between the Cherokee and the settlers. But as far as the British, the relationship that people thinks the Cherokee had with the British wasn't as great as they thought, because when the British had the Cherokees take Fort Loudon from the French, they reneged on a lot of trade goods to the Cherokees, so there was a lot of bad blood there. And by the time the Battle of Kings Mountain had rolled around, the British Indian agents were trying to get the Cherokees to attack the settlements on the other side of the mountain. And basically, the Cherokees told them to fight their own battle, you know. They was pretty much done with the British at that point. But up until Richard Henderson purchased Kentucky from the Cherokee, there was a lot of good trading went on, a lot of good relationships, a lot of intermarriage. Nancy Ward, the beloved woman of the Cherokee, her dad was white. Jacob Brown opened a trading post on the Nolichucky River. He married a Cherokee woman. And so there was a lot of intermarriage. And then when the war broke out with Dragon Canoe against the settlements over there, it wasn't like these people didn't know each other. They had known each other for years. But there was a lot of bad blood got started. 1776 was when they laid Fort Watauga under siege. 1777 was even worse. The settlers all over the other side of the mountain called it the Bloody Sevens. But the Cherokee influence they had on the mountain then, especially with the way they fought, even with the way they dressed, it really came into play, especially on toward the Battle of Kings Mountain.
All right, Mark, before the Battle of Kings Mountain, we had Overmountain men in this area, as I understand it.
We did have Overmountain men in this area. In the middle part of 1780, of course, everybody knows that Charleston is captured in May of 1780, the destruction of the first Southern Army of the Continentals. Over 5,000 men, militia and Continentals, are surrendered, the largest defeat of American military forces until Corregidor in World War II. As part of the parole, Clinton basically said to the militia, if you go home and promise not to fight, you're good, just go home. And a lot of them did and honored their paroles. Then about a week later, Clinton changes the terms of the parole and says, now, if we call you up, you need to respond and serve the British crown. Then about a week later, he changes it again and says, now, you actually are British militia, and you now need to serve against your former comrades. To do this, he names Patrick Ferguson as inspector of militia, and he comes into the backcountry to organize the 7 militia companies of the 96th district. Now, the leader of the backcountry militia at this time on the Patriot side would have been Andrew Pickens, but he actually has taken his parole, and a lot of people don't realize this, the British are actually recruiting him to turn to the British side. And it comes very close. So he's out of the war. And so as smaller patriot militias are starting to reform in response to Tarleton's massacre of the Waxhaws, word comes out, Cornwallis is moving into the area, Loyalist militia starts to form in North Carolina, And Charles McDowell of Quaker Meadows up around present-day Morganton leads groups to Ramser's Mill where they defeat and disperse North Carolina loyalists. Knowing that there is no force in the backcountry of South Carolina, McDowell starts to move his men into South Carolina, fighting an engagement at Earl's Ford up around present-day Landrum, South Carolina. There's a couple of more engagements in and around there, and this essentially begins in July of 1780, starting a 7-month period of intense activity in the Spartan district, which takes in present-day Spartanburg and Cherokee counties. As he is forming his force up, they then make their camp at the Cherokee Ford on the Broad River. From there, they get intelligence that Patrick Moore has garrisoned a bunch of loyalists at Fort Anderson, which we now know as Fort Thickety. And he sends Isaac Shelby and Elijah Clark, who's in command of the Georgia militia, to Fort Thickety to capture that installation, which they do without firing a shot by use of a Quaker cannon. If you don't know what a Quaker cannon is, that's basically a big log on a set of wheels at a good enough distance that the enemy cannot tell that it's real or not, but they know there's something. From there, they also get word, once they capture Thickety, they get word that Alexander Innes, who is underneath Ferguson, is massing militia forces at a place called Musgrove's Mill, which is at the tip of Spartanburg County on the southern end. Isaac Shelby and Clark are dispatched and ride 40 miles overnight from Thickety down to Musgrove's Mill. When they get there, they did not encounter what they expected, which was supposed to be about 150 to 200 loyalists. Instead, they actually encounter Ferguson in a force of nearly 600. They draw the loyalist army into an ambush and are able to push them off the field. It's sort of a draw. But after the battle is over, a messenger comes in with the news of the defeated Camden. Musgrove's Mill takes place on the 18th of August. They get word of the defeated Camden a couple of days before. And almost immediately they get another messenger that's coming in from Thomas Sumter's army, which had been camping on Fishing Creek, which is a tributary of the Catawba River up near the North Carolina border. Turns out Tarleton has surprised him as his men were taking a rest break. And Sumter is only able to get away in his bedclothes. So at this point, Shelby and Clark and James Williams ride back because they realize they're now surrounded on 3 sides by British and Loyalist forces. When they get here to Cherokee Ford, they meet with Colonel McDowell and they agree that they all need to disperse until such times they need to come back together. Basically, the agreement is made that if one of their forces is threatened, they will send word to the others and they will respond in aid. And with that, the South Carolinians under Williams and Lacey march north toward Fishing Creek to rendezvous with whatever's left of Sumter's force. Elijah Clark, McDowell, and Shelby all retreat back into North Carolina. McDowell and his men stay at Quaker Meadows, and Shelby and Clark return over the mountains into the Watauga community to see what happens next.
All right, before we leave Mark, can you talk a little bit about in 2 minutes or less, the Backwater Boys term from Ferguson?
Okay, so after all this is done, Ferguson does not like getting beat. And so it basically looks at the way the British perceive the people who are in the backcountry. Now you gotta remember, the British are very hierarchical in their societal structure. If you are not gentry, you are looked down on as commoners. They tolerate basically the colonial elites like in Charleston because they have a society structured very much like the British. And so if you're over here in the back country, you're just no good. You're nothing more than rabble or banditti. And so Ferguson, as a way to sort of taunt the Overmountain men, refers to them as backwater boys and not men. So he's insulting their manhood in addition to trying to threaten them.
All right, Ms. Jane Doan is gonna talk to us about women that were left on the other side of the mountain.
Well, unfortunately, anytime that somebody from the home front leaves home, everything falls on the person who's left behind. So although many of these women perhaps, because we know there's like 240 left behind from Shelby's, another 240 from Sevier, 400 from the Southwest Virginia. So many of those women perhaps went to a neighbor or went to a more fortified area, but the majority of them in the fall would still have been harvesting, preparing their homes for winter. So those women would have stepped up and accepted the responsibilities of their home, whatever it needed to be. And their children would have been assigned chores. It's according to their age and as much as they could accomplish. And there's some really interesting stories of what some of these women do after the battle in the journeys that they take. And it's very much like the ladies today, step up and take over all the responsibilities of the home. That's where they were.
Didn't
All
you
right.
do any hunting?
I'm sure they did. That's lots of times when we program, I explain the rifle and show mostly young people, but how it would have been loaded, and then I load just with a cartridge and fire. And we talk about the fact that those are usually 4th to 8th graders, and how youth of their age would have been familiar with handling the flintlocks, and that they would have been hunting by 9 or 10 to help put food on the table and help prepare for the winters. And of course, if you happen to be married to one of those long hunters, Daniel Boone was gone so long one time that Rebecca took a new husband. And if your husband's gone that long, the odds are that you and your children are going to have to provide for the family. You can't depend on long hunts for often as long as 2 years, as far away as the Mississippi River. So you couldn't rely on what your man left for you before he left. And as in Rebecca's case, you would probably never have heard if he had been killed or died of an injury on that long hunt.
All right, David Doan. So some of these guys had just gotten back, and there was a muster in September 1780, and then they took on a trail.
Well, the ones that got back, of course, you heard a little bit about Colonel Isaac Shelby, and this man has already been mentioned a few times, Major Patrick Ferguson, for Shelby and McDowell and several of the others over this way had antagonized him, I might say, to a point that he finally just got real mad at us. And he sends, actually it was Shelby's cousin he had captured, and he released him and told him to take a message back over to Shelby, and the message was to lay down your arms and pledge allegiance back to the king, or he'd march his army over the mountain, lay waste to the land and crops with fire and sword, and hang the leaders. Well, when we look back at some of these stories, we wonder why an Irishman like Ferguson sent a message to other Irishmen like him would send such a thing. He thought maybe that we might change our ways, but all he did is aggravate us to the point that Shelby got on his horse, he went down to John Sevier. They put together the plan to muster in Sycamore Shoals on September the 25th, and then they asked Colonel William Campbell in Virginia to join us, and Also, Arthur Campbell, which was a kinsman of William, they brought some, between the two men, they brought 400 men down and joined us at Fort Watauga on September 25th. A few days before that, Colonel McDowell had already retreated over the mountain and was already at the fort, and he joined us when we left to come back this way. During that time period, there was a message sent over to Wilkes and Surrey counties asking for help from those folks, and the Quaker Meadows. Colonel Cleveland brought in about 350, 360 men and joined us. As we come down the trail, we pick up more and more colonels along the way, like Williams, Lacey, Albright, or Hambright, excuse me, and 2 or 3 others. I don't recall their names at this particular time, but they joined us along the trail by the time we get to Kings Mountain. There's quite a few colonels. Those are the key officers that's involved in this. Of course, most of the ones that started it were on the other side of the mountain. But we came over here and y'all come to our aid, so.
All right, you went through some bad weather to get across that mountain in September. A little bit of unusual weather.
Yeah, there was some unusual weather, not like last year though. Last year was an exception.
Okay.
We wouldn't have made it up the mountain if we had last year's weather, would we? When they left Sycamore Shoals or Fort Watauga, they had some cattle they were trying to push up the mountain. But as they went along, it started raining on them. And when they got to the shelving rock and resting grounds at the bottom of the mountain, they'd stop there for the night, rain and stuff. Next morning, when they left out and crossed over Yellow Mountain Gap, there's about 4 inches of snow on the mountain. And when they come off, well, they got rid of the snow, but the rain's back again. So pretty much all the way along the trail, they have rain about every day. When we come into Quaker Meadows, it was still pouring down rain, as McDowell permitted them to burn the top logs off of their fence because probably it was about the driest wood she had to build fires and stuff. And continued on when we were working our way toward Gilberttown. It poured down so hard, we ended up staying there about 3 days, 2 nights. And before we decided we had to move on and get this job done. And it continued to rain on all the way. When we get to Cowpens that night, when they leave, it's so raining so hard you can't see whoever's in front of you or the side of you. We just hope the horses can follow each other without us worrying about where they're at. But the one thing I like to say on the weather, just prior to 3 o'clock, October the 7th, by the grace of God, the rain stopped. No more rain. Nice. And some of this, I mean, is kind of getting into our story, but the thing is, that rain gave us 2 great advantages. One of them was, by this time, well, when we left Cowpens, we had 900 horses, 900 men. How much dust does that stir up? One vehicle out here going down a dirty road stirs up pretty good. Imagine 900 of them vehicles running up and down the road. We didn't have the dust. What do you do when you step on dry leaves and dry twigs? Pop and crackle, don't they? They were too wet to do that. So it seems we had divine guidance around that mountain that day in order to surround it and prepare for battle before it actually started. And we were almost all the way around.
All right, so Tom is going to talk about the spies and messengers among us.
So the first thing I'm gonna do is just read a short excerpt from a broadside that Major Patrick Ferguson issued on October the 1st, 1780. I say, if you wish to be pinioned, robbed, and murdered, and see your wives and daughters in 4 days abused by the dregs of mankind, in short, if you wish to deserve to live or bear the name of men, grasp up your arms in a moment and run to camp. The backwater men have crossed the mountain. McDowell, Hampton, Shelby, and Cleveland are at their head, so you know what they have to depend upon. If you choose to be degraded forever and ever by a set of mongrels, say so at once, and let your women turn your backs upon you and look out for real men to protect them. Now, Ferguson had a rather low opinion of us. Backwater men, as you get up in the top part of it, we're also barbarians. But the question is, October 1st, how did he know that we were going to be within range in 4 days? There were 2 men when we crossed Yellow Mountain Gap and took a roll call. In snow, shoe mouth deep, 2 men were missing, Chambers and Crawford. Were they spies or were they turncoats? September 26th to October 1st gave them enough time to get to Ferguson. By that time, October 1st, he knew we were at Quaker Meadows, and he was moving away from Gilbert Town, and he expected us to catch him in 4 days. We didn't because we hunkered down and ran. He had his spies out, we had our spies out. By the way, who makes a good spy? Would Thomas, stand up Thomas and Albert, would they make good spies?
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't, because they would be associated with one side or the other. Pearl, stand up. The young lady who told the Overmountain men where Ferguson was. Bonnie, stand up. The children, the women, were the prime spies because they could move into the camp. They would do the laundry. They would be the sutlers that would gather the intelligence. The British, when you read their diaries, they don't even bother to mention the women. They don't even notice the women. They moved quietly. Their belief was that women were not capable of understanding military matters. Children certainly not understanding military matters. Thank you. The weak of mind, or the cripples, Mr. Kerr was in the British camp, got all sorts of intelligence because he was a cripple. They did not suspect him. John Ponder was a messenger, young man. I will leave it to your imagination how they managed to get information from the messengers that they captured in very short order. You've heard of the Culpeper Ring, Washington's Culpeper Ring. Who were the keys in that? The women, the children that were moving among the officers and listening and reporting.
All right, Steve, that little girl said he's up there on that mountain. Tell us about it.
Well, once, like David said, once we got to the mountain, we completely surrounded it. And one thing you got to understand about the British is they were very arrogant. They were used to fighting militia up north. In many cases, militia, when the British would charge the field, the militia would drop their weapons and run. Well, when the Overmountain men charged the mountain the first time, they drove them back. Pretty sure they thought they had broken run. They turned around and came back the second time. They came around again the third time. They wasn't used to fighting men like this because these men had fought against the Cherokee and the Shawnee for years, and they had become experts at guerrilla warfare. One thing that the Cherokee was excellent at was hiding, attacking, running, hiding, attacking, running. They were hard to catch, they were hard to see, and these men, they called it Indian play. Matter of fact, I believe it was Shelby that told all the men, give them Indian play. So that's what they were doing the whole time they were on Kings Mountain. They wouldn't stand out in the open. They were hiding behind the trees and rocks and advancing just as fast as they could. They'd step out and fire, step right back in and reload. And the third time, they made it almost to the top of the mountain. And it was Ferguson, he actually had time. He could have made breastwork. He could have got prepared for this attack, but he just didn't do it. He thought his army could not be defeated by a bunch of barbarians. But these men, like I said, they had fought the natives, and believe me, there was no other enemy that you could have worse than the Shawnee or Cherokee back in the day, because they fought hand-to-hand combat and they died proudly. So these men had pretty much took over that way of fighting, hand-to-hand, get close. I mean, some of these men were fighting with their knives and tomahawks against their bayonets. That's how close they were on them. And it worked to their advantage. Giving them Indian play absolutely worked to their advantage on Kings Mountain that day.
The Indians were very, very good, very good.
All right, well, Ferguson promised not to be moved off that mountain, and he wasn't, but the Overmountain men and prisoners were. Tim Massey's gonna talk to us about after the battle, what happened with some of these guys.
After the battle, there's a lot of wounded among the British. Dr. Uzell Johnson serviced as many of them as they could, and the next morning they had fear that Ferguson would be coming in, and they needed to move the prisoners, and the counts varied, but about 800 prisoners was moved. And the idea was to take them toward Hillsborough, where the nearest Continental Army post was. They stopped at a place called Bickerstaff's, and there were several jurists as part of the Overmountain men, and they organized a trial, and they convicted about 30 to be hanged. They did hang 9. Shelby and Sevier put a stop to it. They just didn't have a stomach for seeing those hangings. So they began to move the rest of the prisoners the next day toward Hillsborough, and they just more or less let a lot of them wander off, and they arrived with very few.
Awesome. So the Overmountain men returned. Now I have a question. I do not know the answer to this. I know that y'all think that I know the answers to all the questions before I ask them. Typically I do. I know that Overmountain men, some of them continued to fight. They did not gather as one unit like they had done to fight again, but the race to the Dan, up to 1773 when the deportations happened, were they still engaged in revolutionary things? Did they go home and only to fight the Cherokee? What happens?
A lot of the men that didn't have family back across the mountain, a lot of them joined up with Nathaniel Greene, Daniel Morgan, fought in other battles, you know. So me and Mel was talking about this one day, and he said, you know, if you think about it, there probably wasn't a skirmish in the South that there wasn't some Overmountain men fighting in one form or the other. So yeah, they a lot of them went on to fight other battles for sure, especially if you look at their pensions.
Yeah, my great-granddaddy went with Colonel Shelby and fought with Swamp Fox for a little while.
Okay. So I didn't know the
And
answer.
Sevier didn't get back home, part of his men's already left to go fight some Indians.
Yeah.
And I would say my ancestor, James Withrow, even before all of this, he's actually up in the Cane Creek region of Rutherfordton, up near Gilbertown. He actually fights at Moores Creek Bridge, which is the first major engagement in North Carolina in 1776. Comes back home, next thing we know, he's back down at, I forget, named about just, but excuse me, but it's just below Charlestown. And then he's back up here, he does the Cherokee campaign, so these men were going all over the place. Not just in 1780, but even before that.
Yeah, and even some of the original settlers from present-day Cherokee County were as well. You know, you can find them in Georgia, find them in Florida, back up here, in North Carolina, back here. So
As a
very
matter of
interesting.
fact,
Um,
all these people back here, they owe me rent. That's where my family was. Y'all owe me rent.
All right, anybody got any questions of any of these guys, or do you want to pick a question that we've pre-prepared that you can ask to find out more? Yes, sir.
I have a question, because I'm here representing Irish America 250, which is a subset of America 250. And we're trying to highlight the Irish and the Scotch-Irish participation in this. And I want to know if, from your knowledge of your history and your families and stuff, was a lot of the reason for taking the Patriot side because the British had been so cruel to your ancestors prior to that?
Well, in my case, my ancestor, they originally immigrated, received a land grant from King George II after the French and Indian War. So my ancestor, who actually fought in the Battle of Kings Mountain, was born here. So some of these were probably second generation. They don't have as much tie to or animosity toward the king. Now you compare that to, I mentioned Moores Creek Bridge, and that battle in eastern North Carolina, the British were counting on all these recent emigres who literally had just come from England and Ireland and the Highlands areas and the lowland areas. And they were actually still under an oath that they had to take to the British Crown to serve. So you look on the eastern side of North Carolina, you had that dynamic, but in the back here, you're talking about families that had probably originally immigrated into Pennsylvania and Virginia and had come down the Great Wagon Road with new land grants to settle back here because it was getting too crowded up there. So I would say the people here will still have their distinctive Irish and Scotch-Irish culture, but they were not as animated against the Crown until they received the threat.
Let me expand a little bit. Early on, the British recruited the Scottish Highlanders. They made offers. They recruited 2,000 Scots to come fight for the king.
It's not coming through the building, I promise.
It always helps.
Just a second. We don't hear it until somebody stops talking.
Do you know how many out of those 2,000 were still able to fight two years later? 200. 90% either dead or disabled, so they're not able to fight. Why did they come? 2 recruiting brochures from 1776. Land. British were offering 50 acres of land out of a recruiting brochure, I think it was December 1776, to be taken from the rebels. The corollary for the Continental Army was 100 acres of land, which we would take from the natives, or from the British after they were defeated. So land was the absolute ultimate wealth, because coming out of Scotland, England, where the land was owned by the lords and the nobility, and we were paying 50–60% of all of our incomes and taxes, land was wealth beyond imagination. Land.
So we have 2 different stories here. One, John Knuckles, a Whig, that was very Whig. So, I mean, he talked about the loss of religion from his family. His family had gone from England to Scotland to Ireland, then to the New World. And so he was dead set against the king because his family had, I guess, passed down the loss of freedom of religion. Then we have, he was a captain for the Patriot Militia. We have, Alexander Chesney, loyalist, very young, arrived here in 1773. And though he had come from Ireland and settled here and lost his sister, due to health and starvation in Ireland because they didn't have the food to eat in the land, he was so ecstatic at having all these acres of land and being able to farm and make a way for his family that he was a devout loyalist. Very, very loyal to the king. So, in the same neighborhood, which is a lot of what present-day Cherokee County experiences, even with some of the same roots or same heritage, family histories, depending on when they got here, what their ages was. It's really interesting to see how they chose different sides, based off either their past or their current situations.
I think too, Scots-Irish were fiercely independent. They didn't take being threatened lightly, and as Bobby Moss once said, fighting was in their blood.
Still is. That's one thing that's not changed on the other side of the mountain. Most of these guys will agree with me. If your family goes back generations in those mountains, they're still really clannish
I asked
to this day.
at a funeral for one of David's ancestors, who would have been, the lady I asked was like great, I think only 2 greats back. And I asked her, I said, well, what did the girls in your family, what was the thing that you taught? And she said, we were taught to be fiercely independent. I think I taught maybe a little bit too much of that to my girls because they're all pretty much independent today, but that fierce independence had come down through families. That particular family had come over with Lafayette on the ship with him when he came over to the U.S. So, they've been around, they've seen a lot, but fiercely independent.
I've told her stories about my grandmother Dawn and how strong she was, I guess stubborn too. And then, when we got into this, we got to talk about the Susan family, which don't relate to what we're here today for necessarily, but it does relate to what we were like on the other side of the mountain. But some of the stories I told about my grandmother Dawn, and then she found out my grandmother's mother, or my great-grandmother, was a Susan. And as soon as she learned about the Susan family, she said, now I understand your grandmother. And she's got a good story about an ancestor, just to show you how stubborn we were on the other side of the mountain. When her husband didn't come home, she went and got him.
He's on the monument at Kings Mountain. He was shot through the body, and there were 5 brothers who came together, and family tradition says Hiram was killed, and Joseph was wounded, and Charles was shot through the body. So when the ones who were able to come home came home without Charles, she and her 14-year-old daughter saddled horses, brought another horse with him, came down here and found him, tied him to a horse, and took him back in slow stages, and they said in great fear of the Indians. But yeah, she nursed him back to health. He lived another 30, 40 some years, so, but he eventually died of his wound. But yeah, I can't imagine at that point in life, taking a 14-year-old today is not that mature, but taking your 14-year-old and going and, she left the rest of the family, I'm sure with sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws who had made it home, but, yeah.
Lynn, if I'm not stepping too far out of line in this, but I'd like for everyone to kind of think about this march, the original March to Kings Mountain, 1780. Really, when you stop and look at this, you had two different groups of people on this march. You had 880 men who left the other side of the mountain. The only reason they left the other side of the mountain is because Ferguson is not coming on our side and destroying our homes. We could care, I won't say we could care less about the Revolutionary War, I don't mean that. But that thought at that time was the protection of our homes. But you folks on this side of the mountain, you lived the Revolutionary War. You fought it every day. You were raided every day somewhere on this side of the mountain. You felt the pain, and you were glad to join us. I don't know that either group, this side or our group, we probably would not defeat Ferguson, but we come together. And they ended up with one purpose, and that's to get rid of Ferguson. So I want everybody to remember that. Two different groups come together and fought the battle.
And these two different groups were a bunch of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It was not an organized army, it was a bunch of farmers that had formed militia.
Everyone was militia. Now, we did have some officers that had some military training, but it was militias that come together and defeated 1/3 of Cornwallis's forces.
Adding to David, Clark and McDowell and others came across the mountain, so we were hearing firsthand what was going on, and even had refugees come to that side of the mountain. So.
And that was the thing, Clark had a force, originally, he's fighting with a militia force of nearly 300 in Georgia, but by the time the British take over Georgia in late 1779, he's only able to bring about 100 men and some of their families over the mountain. And so he's looking for help, he's looking for protection. My ancestor that I talk about, James Withrow, he's actually in the Cane Creek community in Rutherford County, right there at Gilbertown. So he's actually pushed out of his home because of his political beliefs. And unfortunately, the interesting thing is, his wife is not harassed because her family are staunch loyalists. And so even with that, you have those disagreements. And so he goes along with his militia unit with McDowell over the mountains again for safety.
Well, and you didn't mention the fact that you even talked about Clark bringing refugees into the Wataugas, and those people were almost starved to death when they
were.
arrived.
And Ferguson, that's actually one of Ferguson's big things, because Ferguson knows that Clark is trying to get into the Overmountain area. And so the Georgians are actually forced to take a more circuitous route, which makes it even a greater hardship on these families. And to the point where, he's got like 100, 150 that go over the mountain. Only 30 are known to have fought at Kings Mountain with Clark.
So Clark originally, he's a transplant Georgian and was actually from here. When he married, he actually settled on the Packlet River with his wife and then transitioned down to Georgia. So we've got some people that may be on their lunch breaks and we're out of time, but I think these guys will be around. I'll be around before you leave. Next month, November the 18th, we are going to have Backcountry Influences of Indian Trader Richard Harris. We're going to have Mr. Larry Flores, who has just written a 2-volume set about Richard Harris and Jacob Hyatt, and what Richard Harris's influences were with the Cherokee, the Catawba, even the settlement of the upper backcountry of South Carolina. So be sure to come back. Next month is Native American month, National Native American Month, and we are going to talk about native traders. So that should be interesting and fun. All right, let's give these guys, go ahead.
And they didn't even ask what happened to Chambers and Crawford.
They didn't,
No,
but
they
I'm sure
didn't.
somebody's gonna wanna know.
Maybe they were involved in what happened, already know.
They were captured in Ferguson's camp after Ferguson was killed. Ferguson did not trust them because they were turncoats. He did not trust turncoats and was going to hang them
That day.
that day.
That day.
When we interfered with that, They were taken as our prisoners to a place, Biggerstaff's Oldfield, where there was a council of North Carolina officials, legal officials. They called a trial, convicted 30 people to be hung, the worst of the worst. Chambers and Crawford were among those. After they hung 9, Sevier convinced everybody to let Chambers and Crawford go. Chambers was a personal friend. Crawford was known to be rather simple of mind and was easily influenced. So they gave him a pass for being influenced by Chambers. Chambers didn't get off scot-free, even though he avoided being hung, because 2 or 3 years later, the Carter County Commission confiscated his lands and drove him out of the region. So don't be a turncoat, don't be a spy, either one can get you killed.
Just don't mess with us Overmountain people.
Let's give it up for these guys. Thank you guys, I know something different. That's awesome, that's awesome. All right, y'all enjoyed this? Don't forget, tonight, 6 o'clock, come to Jolly Park, the drama, outdoor drama of The Night Before Kings Mountain, featuring all these guys. And you.